Lesson 9, Parenting in the Desert. Parenting is a daunting endeavor. I always felt like it was the most monumental task I ever attempted, yet I had the least training of anything else in my life. There were classes and books available, but they were all over the place regarding theories and practices. To make it worse, I grew up during the Dr. Spock era, and we were rapidly discovering how what we initially thought was all wrong. My parents got some interesting advice from their religious peers, which only caused me more confusion when considering how I would tackle this challenging road ahead. As I experimented with different approaches, I found something that worked with my firstborn, but could have done better with the strong willed child. My third child was magnificently different than either of them, and then religion and being a pastor muddied the water even further. It was like an excursion with no map and bad travel guides. Everyone had a theory, but no coherent way forward emerged. To add to the mix, I entered parenthood with a reasonable amount of unaddressed trauma that I did not even realize I had. During the early years of parenthood, there was not enough time to breathe, much less address shadow material or consider such things. Their lives depended on us, and we did our best to keep our heads above water. Later, there were the challenges of middle school and watching our precious children turn into something we could not recognize, only to turn back shortly after that into reasonable human beings and then move out and begin to live their own lives. Sometimes when I sit with them these days, I can't believe we survived all this, much less did it well by anyone's standard. I extract from my excursions and my experiences not an extensive list of guaranteed parenting advice, but more reasonably, just a few things I'm glad I accidentally did well. The following writings originate from things that Laura and I wrote and discussed. We initially released our thoughts in a parenting book called Parenting Deconstructed. Just in case you notice similarities, they're all originating from the same source, evolving out of a fear-based paradigm. I kneeled over a flower bed when I noticed my daughter was standing beside me. She stood like she wanted to talk, so I sat back on the grass, and Lily faced me directly with her hands on her hips, and then she let me have it. For a few years during early parenting, I told people I was paddling my man boat through the estrogen sea because I had two teenage daughters and I had no idea what to do. Lily had been articulate since she was a toddler and retains information like a sponge. So, since I've known her whole life, I've never won an argument with her. Shortly after this, she started informing me about a few things. I became agitated. We have thoughts like, who does she think she is? And this incident happened again later, and I had the same initial emotion. I'm glad I didn't say something like, just calm down and we'll talk later. She needed to express what she was thinking, and thankfully I realized this shortly after she began talking. I couldn't comprehend everything she was trying to teach me, but she did teach me that day. She taught me what makes her tick, what she feels, and about her heart. It was a profoundly intimate moment when she became the teacher that I always wanted to be for her. I'm glad that I was able to dodge my initial instincts and hear her emotions as well as her wisdom. At this time, I started to understand some things that worked for us as parents. It would become clarified after I went through deconstruction and our children matured. But I imagine most of the years when our kids were growing, I had a bewildered look on my face most of the time. We received too much advice from people who did not know what would work either. Not only were we learning, what was working, but we were also slowly discovering what never had a chance of maturing into anything viable. Some of these things were rooted in bad theology, some of our decisions were conceived in ignorance, and many were just flawed assumptions and listening to the wrong people. The common denominator in most bad choices is they all originated from fear. Our worst decisions were rooted in fear. I often state that every religion I study begins its theology with what we should be afraid of. It does not matter what the other person is selling. If they convince us to be scared of hell or dying or not being popular, then they can sell us anything. It happens that way often in parenting. We hear a news report that something is happening in record numbers. Other times, a pastor's message might warn us about something we have never even considered, and then we become determined to act or do something about it. When I was a preacher, I did this subconsciously. Influencers know that fear is the most potent motivator, especially for parents. But fear causes us to be reckless in our strategies. Because we fear what might happen, we overemphasize the urgency to fix a problem we did not even know existed yesterday. I was that guy with purity rings after I watched a video that first created fear, then made me feel guilty and prompted me to act as quickly as I could. I deeply regret giving them the rings. They never spoke of them after that day. The purity culture used our fears to market an agenda that was traumatizing to women and created more problems than it solved. We were often afraid of what people thought. In some ways, we realized it was happening and apologized to our children because we were in ministry and did not see another way out. Our children were incredibly gracious, but I always felt like I was sacrificing my integrity for someone in the church who would turn on us a little later in the journey. Today, I write about being who we are, or authenticity, and I deeply understand how much better respect is than affinity. Even though my teenage children understood compromise, they respect me much more now that they are older. I wish I could have been more authentic for them and myself during their formative years. I do not even attend church now, so I regret much of the activity that I wasted trying to get the congregation to accept me. I could write a book about how fear motivated me to make hasty and unwise decisions in my life and as a parent. Our children understood that we were not perfect, but mostly because we learned to apologize when we got it wrong. Fear is never a good starting place for any decision. When we are misinformed, our emotions cause us to venture outside reasonable logic and make dangerous decisions. So let's talk about some things that we got right. The first one is learning to be brave. My dad never learned to swim. My grandpa is a person I relate to spiritually in a strange, metaphysical way. I can almost feel him sometimes. But I remember a time when he teased my dad about never learning to swim and about being lazy. It had a profound and powerful impact on me, not because it was good parenting 101, but because of the opposite of what I described above. I did not want to be afraid of anything. As I described above, I often succumbed to my fears, especially when people I admired told me I should be afraid. But after listening to my grandpa and my father, I determined that I never wanted to regret missing an opportunity simply because I was scared. I made 11 skydiving jumps, took karate, and did things like writing books. I had a crippling fear of public speaking, and I overcame it to be an effective speaker and preacher. I traveled overseas and changed careers several times because I did not want to regret what I was afraid to experience. It would be okay if I failed, but it would not be acceptable if I did not try. I was determined to instill this type of bravery in my children. I wanted them to learn to be confident, to answer the phone, to speak in public, and to make their own decisions. So when my oldest daughter, Abby, was young, I started whispering in her ear to be brave. Many years later, I saw a social media post from her that said, "I don't need a man to slay the dragon. I am the dragon." She has undoubtedly been courageous in achieving the goals she set out to accomplish, and she is thriving as an RN in the Kansas City area. Occasionally, I overheard my children talking. Sometimes it wasn't comforting, and other times it was life giving. The latter occurred when I heard Abby whispering to her sister to be brave. You cannot imagine how inspiring and uplifting that was. It was one of the greatest moments in my life. And now I've witnessed her teaching bravery to her two daughters and her husband. Children are sometimes naturally reckless, but bravery must be modeled and taught. Amidst the sea of machismo, crowd following, and foolish behavior can be genuine character building bravery. It is authentic, honest, and inspiring. I challenge you to experience true bravery in your journey and to share that challenge with those who look up to you. Finding our voice. My parents told me stories of how I would hide under the coffee table when people came over. I played sports and participated in most activities, but always found a way not to talk. When I went to college, I had to take a speech class. I was doing okay in the class, which interested me because it was a new adventure. But I almost flunked out of the class because I left out over half of a 15-minute speech. I just forgot it. Earlier in my career, a manager called me into her office and informed me of her issue with my performance. She told me I was a good worker, but I needed to learn to speak to others, or it's just not going to work out. She referred me to a group that met on campus, and I started attending reluctantly after work. It was a little club for people like me. We mostly spoke extemporaneously, which felt like torture. When it was your turn, someone would hand you a topic and you would have to talk for a minute or two. That felt like an eternity, and I almost vomited a few times. The experience challenged me and caused me to get better. Later, I would join a Toastmasters group while working for another employer. I won a couple of awards and later became president of that group. I thought I had conquered my fear until I had to teach from the Bible for the first time. I was being licensed for ministry, and my pastor let me teach a lecture at our church. Again, I felt like I was going to be sick. It got easier over time until I preached my first sermon. With each new challenge came a new level of pain, adjustment, and proficiency, or as close as I could come to any of that. So one day when Laura and I started writing about finding our voice, I assumed I had already found my voice, especially since I was a pastor and got to say what I thought every Sunday. As I reflected on this and after leaving the pastorate, I realized I did not authentically have a voice because I always had to answer the board, the deacons, or the congregation. I subconsciously knew I could only go so far with challenging their long held beliefs. No matter how smart, talented, or insightful I might be, the people wanted their pastor to talk about what they expected him to talk about. After deconstructing and leaving the pulpit, I began to understand, finding my voice, and reflected on how I shared it with my children. I remember a painful conversation with my son, Jordan, when I needed him to tell me about something that happened to him at college. It was like he was experiencing the difficulty I experienced all those years trying to learn to communicate effectively. What was it that had to happen in those speeches and conversations? We have to be vulnerable. It's so important. Bravery and vulnerability go together. I did not know what he would say, and he did not know how I would receive it. But being vulnerable is essential in writing and healing and all aspects of my journey. But I also had to teach it to my children. It had something to do with being seen with eyes of grace. When we spill the beans and do not die, it heals the shame and creates new confidence. We are so vulnerable with our children since we have deconstructed, much less judgmental than we used to be. But finding our voice also births in us a deeper root into authenticity. We can now speak to each other as ourselves without playing a role. Because we now realize how much every person needs their autonomy, we do not play roles or put expectations on them. We are learning to be who we are. Figuring out who we are is difficult after deconstruction. So much of what we identified with before was what we did and what was expected of us. Now that much of that is stripped away, we must ask questions like, what do we really like to do? What do we like to do? And what do we care about? What is our truth that needs telling? The wonderful thing we can now do is ask those questions honestly to our grown children and, for the first time, not have any expectations. Knowing who we are and discovering our children may be one of the greatest gifts we can give to our family members. We also taught them to think for themselves. I always said that I wanted them to find their own faith, even when I was deep into ministry. But what I really wanted from them was for them to find my faith. Eventually, they were all baptized into the faith that I was participating in. What I did not see was, at the time, I was teaching them to think for themselves. I remember seeing an essay Jordan wrote at college about the legalization of marijuana and realizing he honestly was thinking for himself. All of our kids moved away from home and went to college and established lives for themselves. They all have their own lives, beliefs, and political views. And I am so thankful we fostered this passion in them to discover how they feel about various things in life. There were times when it worried me, but now it is the greatest gift we could have given them. I remember when we told the girls we were deconstructing. They acknowledged they had been waiting for us to evolve. They were accepting and gracious to us for our past and how we raised them. They took the good things from our experience and found the best of all of our experiences. None of us are in the same place on any issue, but we are all thinking for ourselves and accepting each other. Controlling our children into believing like us rarely works. Our energy might be better spent fostering love, forgiveness, and compassion for each other. It's better to give them analysis tools than indoctrinating them with our beliefs. My daughter, who stood over me and told me off, was at my house the other day. We sat on the porch with her son, and she composed some music on her guitar to one of my poems about my dog. It was a beautiful night, and I realized how much I respect her. She is brave, she thinks for herself, and she has found her authentic, vulnerable voice. But our relationship would not have been the same if I had not evolved through deconstruction and the work I have done in my shadow. Some of my beliefs were toxic, and I needed to be brave and rethink what was important to me. I have become a much better and more present and authentic dad and papa. Laura and I joke that we want to be like our kids at various times. It is true. Most of the things we thought we cared about when we were young turned out to be unimportant, just desires of our ego and a fear of what others would think. The good things we are discovering now echo what our children are finding. We are on a brave, exciting journey that includes our children. We hardly ever agree totally, but we have tools of discovery that'll lead us to where we should go.
Validating our child's emotions. I started teaching later in life. but I have refined my classroom management skills. So I always feel like I am in control and moving toward valuable objectives. At the time of this writing, I teach second grade at a rural elementary school. And even though the challenges are varied, they are predictable. I can usually guess what children will say under most circumstances, and little surprises me anymore. But when the children were playing with Legos, one of my students blurted out, "I'm stupid." I pulled him aside and quickly reassured him, "No, you are not." He argued that he was sure he was because someone in his family informed him of that. My heart broke, and I realized I had not responded appropriately to this young fellow. We often react to heartbreaking situations like this the best that we can. We want to rescue them quickly. We see them in danger and we need to save them, even though their misunderstanding is deeply rooted in their own experience. However, we cannot always rescue them or even help them immediately. If the person they care about most thinks they are deficient, they will think less of themselves than they could. While we do not want them to feel these negative emotions, the real problem may be our discomfort. If our children or student feels terrible about themselves, it reminds us of how we sometimes felt inside and were treated in our early days. But this young man in my classroom did not need me to rescue him or tell him the correct answer. He already believed the lie propagated by the person he cared about. He may not have wanted it to be true, and he may not have been happy about it, but he believed it because of who told him. What did he need from me that I did not give him? Before I said anything else, I could have validated his feelings. The simplest way to do that is to repeat what you hear. When he stated that he felt stupid, I could have said something like, "So you feel stupid? That must be really hard for you." There is no need to agree or disagree with him initially. We are discussing how he feels, not how I perceive the situation. We must acknowledge his feelings and recognize where he is emotionally. When my husband and I are doing a focusing session with someone, we often help them say how they are feeling. They will eventually say, "A part of me feels." After they express how they feel and where they feel it, we do not tell them they should or should not feel that, or whether we agree with how they feel. We just repeat it back to them. We say, "So a part of you feels." We often tell them they have a right to feel how they feel. Usually that gets the ball rolling so they can move forward toward healing. We must avoid the urge to react from our trauma, which always comes out reactionary. We can respond to our children in similar ways. We may have a more significant influence on them, but that makes what we say and how we say it even more relevant. The pause between our reaction and our response often makes all the difference in the world. In the brief time it takes to draw a breath, we can choose more effectively whether to speak and what would be best to say. As I mentioned before, we do not want them to feel pain, and we desperately try to rescue them from it when we can. I remember when my children experienced physical pain, and I always went to them immediately, and I did what I could to alleviate it. It is much the same reaction when we see them emotionally hurting. Our initial reaction may be to rescue them from feelings of unworthiness and find a quick fix to their problems. But often it makes sense to do something a little more deliberate and pursue a more thoughtful approach. Indeed, there are life threatening situations, so we have the basic instinct to act quickly. But most things are not life or death, and they will benefit from a deliberate, thoughtful response. My job initially was not to judge how they felt, but to hear it clearly. The best way to acknowledge how someone feels is to ask them, "How do you feel?" and then repeat it to them. I was so surprised the first time I did this with someone. It meant so much more than me hurriedly trying to imagine a solution for them. Most often, people and children respond with more information, beginning with, "Yeah, and," where they dive deeper into the cause and reasons that they feel that way. Given enough time and care, they may even be able to devise their solution to how they feel without us having to imagine one for them. Especially with younger children, we may have to help them recognize emotions they have trouble verbalizing. Often we could say, "Does it feel more like this or more like that?" Even if the answer is icky like, go with the answer they determine is best, but keep trying to help them with the vocabulary. It is essential not to presuppose what they are feeling. Many times, my children surprise me with their understanding. They may not have had the vocabulary, but they are experts at how they feel and think about that more than anything else. We must take the role of an observer, and anything we can do to remind us to stay in that role is helpful. Breathing deeply helps us pause and listen long enough for them to form their next thoughts. We might ask, "How does that make you feel?" Or "How do you describe your feelings?" I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to pause and make sure you are not advising until they have thoroughly explored the depths of what they feel and what they think that feeling is telling them. Listen, ask questions, and breathe. We do not just get these negative messages from parents, they also come from other groups, including religion. Children gain clarity about their feelings and desires when we verbally reflect on them. But different messages and even trauma are introduced from the messages they are hearing from others. The next way to penetrate the messaging we all receive is to ask, "How do you feel about that?" This helps us understand how they have processed what they have heard and whether it is a positive or negative impact. With good caregiving, we may help them avoid the trauma they otherwise would have faced. Our children have forgiven us for most of our mistakes, but it might have been better not to make them in the first place. I hope you learn to be proficient and pause after the initial shock long enough not to react and to respond with better questions. Learning to understand and validate your child's feelings may be one of the superpowers parents have been searching for.
I try not to have regrets, but there are things I wish I could have done better. Like my parents, I did the best I could with the information I had. So, although I give myself grace, I don't want to defend those ineffective ways. I want to pursue and promote a better way if possible. Like when I was parented by fear, I often listened to the voices around me. If I listened to the prominent voices telling me how to do it, I could at least blame it on them or if something didn't work out right. Because I know that I don't know for sure, I often trusted the consensus instead of my authentic inner voice. But now I realize I can trust myself. I learn more from my inner authentic voice than the cacophony of voices around me. It takes more patience, and I must first tune out all the noise of my world. It is more disciplined and less mainstream, but also more authentic and genuine. I sense that my grown children and my grandchildren do not want me to be anything other than what I am. They want me to be me. They want me to be authentic. I now look inward and trust the divine voice inside me. I rely on my true self more than those around me to tell me how to be and what to say. The challenge is that even if my children and Laura have expectations of me, they imagine things going a certain way and me doing certain things. Some of that is based on assumptions about life and their strengths and weaknesses. But my best move is to access the divine inside me and proceed from my authentic self. It's best for me to be me and to trust myself. It's best to be genuine. Even though it makes me vulnerable, it not only is best for me, but it's also the best for them as well. Our children have always been gracious about mistakes, probably because we asked for forgiveness and told them we were sorry. They could forgive us and learn from our mistakes. But if we can avoid it, I hope we can pursue a better path in the future. Let us be ourselves and trust ourselves more than seeking some mythical dogma or contrived way of being based on consensus. Let us go inside, find truth, and live authentically from that way of being and becoming.
Okay, so let's have a little discussion about this portion that we just did. So, in your opinion, did religion make parenting harder for us?
I would say that it did, especially since I was a pastor. There's the normal things of if you're going to church, there's normal pressures there. Like a lot of people are watching me, a lot of people are looking at my kids and making judgments and things like that. And that's in any organization, I would assume. But, even more so as a pastor, because those people are thinking the pastor's family, like, is an image of us in some way. And so there's a little too much pressure there. I think, along with the other toxic things about Christianity that are just kind of systemic and accepted, and we just kind of go along with them most of the time. But yeah, it makes parenting harder. There's, well, sometimes you could benefit, I think, from, another adult, being involved in your family and helping, maybe giving some advice. But when you got a lot of people doing that at the same time and an institutional idea, that may not be clear,
Right.
what are we about and how should our children act in a congregation? They probably think they're united about that, but there's a lot of different opinions and then all that comes at you because of religion.
I do think that pastors' kids have a different expectation to them. And I remember that was one of the first things that I said when you told me, that you thought you were called into the ministry is, our kids are kids, and it was easy for me to say that, but I did feel the added weight of, but they should be better because their dad is a pastor. So yeah, I agree with you.
And we had absolutely no tools to make that happen.
Right.
It
was just supposed to happen
based on how well my parents did and your parents did or didn't do, and what I've learned along the way, how many books I've read, and you certainly don't learn it from the Bible. There's no good parenting advice in the Bible at all, except children obey your parents. An elder is supposed to have good kids, good family, good, very little guidance on how that works out.
Yeah. And some of the books that are out there, I wouldn't use as
right.
parenting books either. There's a lot of really damaging.
My parents used Dr. Spock, which,
a lot of people use James Dobson, which we're finding out was very traumatizing.
Very bad. And then you've got IFB who trusts in that guy, and he was really weird and off base.
And doesn't even have children.
And doesn't have children and doesn't have a wife.
All right.
So, but you're still going to get things from all that, even though they don't have any high ground at all
Mm-hmm.
to give that advice to you.
Right.
And I almost think, and I hope it came out in the video, that parenting is something you just have little or no uh, real wisdom going in.
Mm, for sure.
We think we know everything after the first one, or
Mhm.
the first one gets to be 2 or 3 years old, and all of a sudden we're an expert at parenting. We got this. Our kid's a genius.
Yeah.
Until
Yeah.
he goes to school, and then um, it's just a thing that's so important. Yet we have so little actual support and actual guidance
Mm-hmm.
to do it. And even looking back, just our video has about 4 points because that's what we glean from all of our experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about the best I can offer you.
Right. Okay, so relive the purity rings era, if you will.
Do I have to?
Well, I know. Well, and part of that was encouragement from me too. So it's not like I'm innocent in that whole thing.
Yeah, we were in our second church. So very fundamentalist, did well in our first church, went to the second church. And a few of the mothers, I think, were really, really gung ho about abstinence education and purity rings, and purity culture was big. Some kind of movie was out, about a dad protecting his daughters, and then he gave them the purity rings, and that was their promise and his promise to protect them. And I like that side of it, that I would, somehow be influential in their life and protect them from getting hurt, which you can't really do. Um, you know, and so I watched the video, got fired up, um, got the ring, and gave it to them, and I just never heard anything about it after.
No, they were already like, for lack of a better term, they had already started their deconstruction. They weren't quite buying what we were selling in the church.
Yeah, there's a lot of hypocrisy in that
Right.
church.
And
Yeah.
and they saw it. They saw it firsthand. Never really said anything to us, but I think that's why they were just like, not buying the whole purity ring thing.
That's the church that has so many of those children, youth and college age kids from that church are some of the most loyal.
They're all young adults now.
Yeah, they're all my Facebook followers and stuff now, even though their parents don't even talk to me. So definitely was something going on there that our children were able to see and we couldn't see till later.
Right.
So,
Right. So would you describe our children as brave? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Okay. Yeah, so now I got to stand behind this, right? So I think, at times they're scared and so on, but our son has moved, he moved overseas. He's halfway around the world in Taiwan, teaching there, having a great time and doing well. But he left the summer between his junior and senior year in college, and then right after college went straight there. So I think that's brave. Our daughter is the breadwinner for her family
right now.
RN, yeah, and that's their situation right now, and she's doing well. She's offered a promotion, decided she wanted to be with babies. She's doing what she wants to do. And our youngest daughter, has been through a lot more than I've been through in my life, and she's continuing to move forward, heal, and understand and regroup. And so, yeah, I'd say they're all brave.
And I think that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared.
Right.
Doesn't mean you don't make mistakes. I think it means what you said, and it means that you find what works best for you, your life, your family, your situation, and you continue to move forward.
Yeah.
I don't think it means that you're never scared.
Right.
Or you never have doubts, because I just think that's just a part of life.
Yeah. I would say if you're not scared, that's bad.
Yeah.
Because, that's kind of psychopathic in a way. I'm not afraid of anything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you should be, because there's some dangerous things in the
Right.
world.
Mm-hmm.
But if that fear, keeps us stalled and keeps us from trying things and moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to kind of little by little say, I want to, when we had a phone on the wall, answer the phone, be brave,
Back in the day.
or call somebody,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and things
Yeah.
like that. You just start with little things, and then you have to trust them, and
Right.
that's what they're wanting.
Mm-hmm.
That's what teenagers say a lot. You don't trust me. You
Mm.
don't trust me, and part of us says, well, we shouldn't trust you, but we have to.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Even if they're going to make a mistake, and even though if it makes them vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
You can't protect your children to the point of them not ever being vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
because then they can't be brave themselves.
Right. Right. Do you think we're still finding our voice even at this stage of our lives?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, how do we help? So, if we're still finding our voice, and I totally agree with that, how do we help other people find their voices, even in the midst of finding our own voice?
I think it's deeply connected to finding out who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Because how do you know what you're going to say if you don't even know who you are?
Mm-hmm.
And again, religion muddies that a lot, because we become a part of the collective. We become a part of the pastor's goal and the church's goal and the church's activities and what the pastor wants us to do. So we lose ourselves in religion, right?
Yeah.
We sometimes lose ourselves in high control families. We get small.
Mm-hmm.
But when we know who we are, and that's overcoming the PTSD of religion. The first order of business is to find out who you are. And people can make fun of that all they want and say, oh, you're finding yourself. That's really cool,
Yeah.
But there's a deep thing about that I think is really important. You have to find out who you are. And until you know who you are, you don't know what you should do.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, I agree.
I answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So overall, do you think we did a good job as parents?
There's probably 100 things I wish I did different.
Yeah. I do think, though, that I think one of the things that we've been able to do right is apologize for the things that we did that could have been hurtful to our children. So I think when you're able to apologize for those things, then that brings healing and that brings connectivity and all those things that we hope to do initially as parents. But like you said, there's not a playbook. Situations arise and we just do the best that we can with the information we have. But when we know better, we do better. So
I'm really proud of our 3 kids, what they've done, what they're doing. And I learned from most of them, a lot of the time. So did we do a good job? I think there were times, like
I think in the moment we thought we were doing a good job, right?
Right.
But I mean, looking back, you can see where, we probably did things that, like you said, going back, we would not do if we could do it again.
And so, looking back though, I would say, and it just sounds so cliche as many times as we say it, that it's all about fear and control. And when we're afraid and we try to control, we may get an immediate result.
Right.
But I maybe have been too harsh with my children just because I'm afraid that something's going to happen or somebody's going to find out they were doing something wrong or then, whatever. That fear causes me to control, and control gets an immediate response, but it doesn't develop good human beings.
Right.
They need you to deal with your fear, right? And when you deal with your fear, that's what teaches them to be brave,
right?
And things like that. Right. And to admit to them, I'm a little afraid of this, but I'm going to do it anyhow. And I'm not so afraid of what the congregation thinks that
Mhm.
I'm going to let you down.
Mhm.
You know, I'm going to try to treat you as a child of mine,
Mhm.
not a child of the congregation.
Right.
And
Right.
so, you know, all that stuff works together somehow.
Mhm.
Um, but I wouldn't say there's ever going to be a book that you can read, and
No.
especially not the Bible,
Well, and
to say this specifically will work every time. And this is what you need to
well, that's because every individual is an individual.
do. Mhm.
And there may be some things that we can generalize across children, but you have to take the time to know your child or your children. And we learned that we have three,
Mhm.
and the same things didn't work for all three of them.
Right. And you can't, in trying to help them be brave, you can't push them too far.
Right.
If they're not ready to go there,
Mhm.
they're going to get hurt.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you need to understand not only yourself, you need to
Mhm.
understand who they are.
Right.
And I think that's what my daughter Lily was trying to tell me in the incident I described,
Mhm.
but also in her graduation speech when she was valedictorian.
Mhm.
What she said in that speech should
Mhm.
have warned us,
Mhm.
now that she felt she
Mhm.
wasn't ready,
Mhm.
you know, and so then you're trying to make them brave,
Mhm.
do like you did before, and it doesn't work. So
Right.
you have to pay attention, maybe
Yeah.
is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good. So we have any action
Yeah, we
steps?
do. We have lesson 9. I think we have like one action step. Do you
Yeah.
want to share what that is?
Well, I can. It says, what changes in focus for you were prompted by this discussion in this video?
Mm-hmm.
What can you change?
Yeah, it's
Maybe
not about changing. Sorry, I keep interrupting, but it's not about changing other people. It's about changing
it is absolutely.
yourself.
And maybe, you know, maybe you're going to be a grandparent or you're a grandparent
Mm-hmm.
and you need to repair some things with your
Mhm.
kids, or just spend an afternoon with them and let them know you messed up.
Mhm.
Tell them you're sorry.
Right.
And yeah, I've asked them several times, did we do a good job? And they said, well, you know, the more we see, the more we now realize you're better than a lot of our friends' parents
Yeah.
that we didn't know about. And so, you know, they're always going to have that weird kind of perception.
Mhm. But there's, I think with everything in life, you just have to realize there's always room to grow. I know that's, in school, we talk so much about growth mindset, right? And so you may not be good at something yet. There's always room for improvement. And I think
Mhm.
as long as you stay humble enough to that, and I don't mean like self deprecating, but humble and say, and we can learn from our children, not just when they're adults, but we can learn from them if we take time to have conversations with them and build those relationships even when they're young. Absolutely, always growing.
On to lesson 10, huh?
Yep.
All right. See you there.